call the meeting to order. This should be meeting number 6 of the Fort River Building Committee. Today's March 19th. I don't remember. Oh, and we're being recorded by Amherst Media. That's all my preamble stuff. First thing on the agenda after the call to order is to approve minutes from the previous meeting. Did everyone get a chance? I realized they went out kind of late, but did everyone get a chance to look at them? Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Great.
I didn't get a chance to
Oh,
read.
sorry.
Just abstaining because I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
read them thoroughly.
Next is our public comment period, and we again, well, we do have some members of the public, but they're reserving comment at the moment. Moving on, the two big items today are looking kind of budget items and the RFQs. I've got them in order where we're looking at the RFQ first and then the budget, but if folks would like to switch it up and look at the budget first, we can do that. When the working group on the other RFQ, the RFQ for the designer, we're talking on Friday, we thought maybe we might want to do budget first, but that was after I had this posted. So, do folks have a preference?
You have to leave it.
Reasonably early.
So maybe we should just leave it as
Indoor.
is. And I put the following thing right first, which is the invoices we have on our from our meeting taker. And I did that because I didn't want to lose a quorum, because I would like to pass these on, I think, to Anthony if we vote to move them forward. And so does anyone have any questions on the invoices we have from our meeting taker? Yep.
Do we have a projection about like if we continue at this rate? Budget?
I think Christine did make a projection as part of the overall budget.
I did.
Don't bother me! No, stop!
You're looking for a motion?
Yes.
I'd like to move to approve
Don't touch
the 2 invoices for minute taking and recording of our minutes. So the first invoice for the meeting of February 26, 2018 for $225, and the second meeting for March 12, 2018 for $112.50.
You could do that. I'm doing my best. You could do my best. Do that.
All in favor?
You could do my
Any opposed?
do my best.
Okay.
Don't do hard
Anthony,
than
do you have
that.
the-
Do that.
I did forward those. Do I need to do anything more formal than that to get the invoices to you? Just procedurally, since it's
No,
the
that
first
should
step?
that should be enough. I can
Okay.
get this signed.
Okay. Okay. Now, moving on to the RFQ, draft RFQ.
So for the indoor air quality.
Yes.
So this is essentially what we talked about before. I did include radon as an added bid item. It includes the same asbestos airborne, mold bacteria airborne, mold bacteria surface, and radon airborne. We're figuring on 14 samples. This should cover the bulk of the school, and this will give us a general idea of the ventilation quality within the school. It includes carbon monoxide, dioxide, relative humidity and temperature at each of the test locations. That's the contract language on the top of it, and that's pretty much what we looked at before. Discussion?
I think this is great. Thank you for doing that. The only concern that I have is that I did run through estimated project costs for the duration of the project, and you're estimating about 20,000
Yes.
per the 2. I think we need to spend less. I actually reduced that line item in my pretend budget by 20% for each, so 16K. each time. And I'm wondering, I don't think that that's the answer, but I'm wondering where in between those might be appropriate, or if the higher end with the 14 tests, as you've outlined now, is really where we should be.
So I think the 14 test is a pretty good indication of the overall school condition, and maybe it's worthwhile to run 14 tests in the first cycle and 6 or 7 or 5 in the
Reduce.
second cycle, because once we have the overall testing results, then we can compare apples to apples in particular spaces.
I think that's a great suggestion.
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay.
Is that a change you could readily make?
Oh, without effort.
Meaning, in other words, if we approve, if this committee approves it, then you could make that change and the other edits would stay the same so that we wouldn't be in a situation.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we would test for the 14 this pass, and the even, we'll pick 6 that are most representative for the next one. So it's an inconsequential change.
And we may not even need to change it based on how the other things shake out. I do have a contingency line item in there, so.
Okay, good.
Does the document as written state when we want the testing to happen? And if not, do we want to include that in the document as to?
It does not at this juncture. As it currently reads, the quotes are due on March 30th. But we don't indicate a specific time, but we can.
It's just throwing it out for discussion.
Generally, we coordinate with the contractors, but we do definitely want it done before the April vacation.
That was my concern.
Right.
Other comments, questions?
Can I borrow that for a second?
Absolutely.
You're going to notice a pattern with me.
So my question regarding the timing, can it be that the winning bid might not be able to do it before the April vacation, or is going to be a condition for winning the bid that it has to be done before the April vacation?
We can state in the bid documents that it must be accomplished by X date.
Okay.
And we need 48 hours to complete part of it. If we don't do the radon, then we don't even need that long. It can be done in a day.
Okay.
I'd like to move that the committee approve the town of Amherst seeking written quotes, air quality testing at Four Rivers School solicitation as amended. For
Second.
discussion.
All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, moving on, we come to the tentative budget. Does everyone have a copy of that? Oops.
Do you have more?
Yeah, I have one.
I actually did.
I love the fact, by the way, everything I was asking for was already in my packet if I just looked. I kept grabbing your documents and they're actually right here.
Oh, I think I gave away the last one. Oh, well.
That sounds good.
Yeah, no, I think I gave away the last one, so if there's a spare, we might need to share
What do you need?
just that.
Do you want to take this and you can share?
Great, thank you.
Christine, did you want to talk
Sure.
about the process you went through
Yes.
putting this together?
So I started with the 2 things that we've already committed to, which would be Amherst Media and a stenographer. I used an estimate of about 3 hours of the stenographer's time per meeting, and I used 1.25 meetings per month, since we're doing a few more this month than normal, and we might be, having a few more in the future per month than you might think. And I strung that out over 2 years. So that's how I arrived at that number. The other 2, like I mentioned earlier, for indoor air quality testing, I reduced those by 20% in an effort to get as much money as I could towards the design fee and the consultants. So basically I took all of the separate line items that I think the costs we might have, and put them up front and subtotaled them, and then the remainder is what would be our working budget for the architects and design team. So after the indoor air quality, I also included a separate line item for asbestos testing. I think this could be generally applied to any testing that we might do, like flow testing for sprinkler and water pressure, which we probably want to know. I have a minor item in here for advertising. The surveyor I have at $5,000. I think this is about right. It might be less. I mean, it's 11 acres, which is a lot of acreage. But I think that there's minimal utilities on the site aside from the entrance for the school. And it's mostly flat and wetlands, so that might be less. Same for geotech. I think 10,000 is a good number for right now. It could be definitely more depending on the design options that the design team comes up with and what corners of the structure they want to drill borings for. So it could be less too. I have a line item in here for legal, $2,000. It's an allowance just in case we get into an issue where we want to seek legal counsel. And then I also have one in here for an independent cost estimator. We're expecting the design team to carry a cost estimator within their consultant group, but I think it would be necessary and useful for us to have our own estimator who would estimate the same work at the same time, and then we would reconcile those two estimates to have a little more firm footing on what we think the cost proposals are. And then lastly is a contingency, which I'm holding at 3% of the total, $250,000. So I fully expect to spend that contingency. I don't think we'll be like $7,500 in the bank, but I think that we would end up spending that, towards the air quality testing that I haven't covered, which is, $8,000. So there's the contingency right there, or additional requested design services. So once I put that together, I strung it out over what I thought might be the life cycle of this project, which I think is another attachment. And we don't have to go right into that, but just so you know how I did it was cost first and then anticipated time.
Anyone have questions?
I'm just wondering with the, how you came up with 3% for contingency.
Mm-hmm. So normally when the project's not very well defined, I like to carry a higher contingency. But because this is just the feasibility stage and we're really talking about a very set amount of testing and a very set amount of design
There's
scope,
not a lot of unknowns.
there's not a lot of unknowns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think it's important to bear in mind that the hope was to keep as much money as we could for the designer's fee.
That's right.
Compared to the last one, which was admittedly a different process than this, that was closer to 250.
220,
220.
right? So the design fee, I looked at the Wildwood invoices, and the designer's fee for feasibility only was $218,000, so almost $220,000. And then there was an additional $31,000 of additional services that were paid separately from the design fee. So I think it was a geotech and a traffic study, and one other thing that I don't recall.
Pre-construction as well? Was it pre-construction services?
No, I didn't add those in. I didn't. So taking those two things, the design fees and the additional services that were used during that period, that adds up to $250,000, which I think is probably about how our budget was set. So as Jonathan's noted, though, this is a different project in a different site. We don't have nearly the topography or the infrastructure or some of the other items that the Wildwood site has. So I would like to spend more money on the design fee, but I don't see how we could squeeze it from any of the other line items responsibly.
I don't think this is an item we necessarily have to vote on, but I think it's a good framework, and at some point, the piece that the working group needs to incorporate is what that amount for the designer that actually gets put and published in the RFQ that goes out to the designer. So this is kind of background to that.
interesting sort of question around that, just for the, I guess particularly I'm thinking for the folks around the table who've worked on projects and stuff like that, is I would, in my mind, I'd be inclined to publish, if they think the figure's 180, I'd be inclined to find some way to indicate the amount. Because if you're, and I'm saying it like a statement, but I'm raising it like a question. I mean it to be like a question or a thought experiment. Is if you think normally a project like this would cost more to do, and we think but we don't have that much, so we only have 180. Then to me, there's sort of two reasons why I'd want to indicate it. One is to weed out folks who might otherwise just simply bid higher and say we're going to charge you another 70,000 if we don't have it. And then the other reason is depending on the responses, we might get responses back that tell us what we can get for 180, which could be very useful response for us to see. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. So that's why I'm saying it's kind of a question.
Yeah. I think Andy might have has,
So just to say that we will have to do something like that under Chapter 7C. We have two options for the fee. We can either set a fee and say this is our fee, no negotiation. If you win, this is what you'll be paid. Or we can say we will negotiate a fee with the highest listed candidate, and we will have to set a limit that fee will not exceed. So it's basically, do we want to negotiate or not, will be the question. But we'll have to put either a ceiling or a bullet on the fee.
So what we've been discussing is the not to exceed fee, which seems appropriate with negotiation. But that's certainly up for discussion with the larger committee. But I think importantly too to remember is that this feasibility study is only the first one that would be done for this project. So while we might not have as much money now as we would have liked, I do think that it's enough to at least set the foundation and define the pros and cons of pursuing a project at this site.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Other questions related to this?
I have a question about legal. Do we need to get our own separate lawyers, or can we use the town lawyers?
I think it's, at the moment, just kind of a line item. I don't personally know if we needed legal counsel where we would go. I think we'd have to ask the question when the time arose.
Maybe town council?
It would.
Yeah, town council?
It would be town council. They will definitely have to review the final contract.
Yeah.
I don't expect that they would invoice us separately, though. I think it would just be part of the town's
Part of
contract.
overhead.
Yeah, I don't get individual bills from the lawyer based on what I send to them. So
That's good to know. We have a letter to make
Well, maybe we do.
now, if we had a bid protest, the story might be different.
That would be different.
It might be. I don't know.
It's interesting.
That was my question.
Well,
I think we've exhausted our agenda.
I think we did. We had a brief one today. I think
Sorry.
that's okay.
Would anybody like to go over the project schedule? Because
Right, sorry. Yeah, she did a lot of work on it.
But mostly because I think that it's one sort of sets milestones for the committee
Yep.
and targets potential voting dates. And then I think it also, if we can look at the feasibility study portion of it, help. I sort of did a not worst case, but longest case. And I don't have a copy of it, so.
And I think I may have printed off one. I meant to circle back and print off more. Hopefully someone had one.
I looked, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
I looked at the two attachments that you sent, and what were the difference in these two? One was,
One was 3 pages, so it was longer because it had more detail. The other one takes those detail subtasks and basically pushes them into the overall line item task, so it prints on 1 page.
that totally makes sense. I looked at what's the funny thing is I looked at the long one first, and it looked good, by the way. It looked good. And then I was, not that I know, you know more than I do, so
Thank you.
I guess it
I'll
looked,
take
I guess
it.
it looked good, right? For what I know. But then the funny thing is I looked at the other one and I'm like, I was trying to make sense of it because I'm like, it seemed like it was the same thing.
Yes.
I guess what it was.
Condensed.
Yeah.
It was, same thing condensed.
Cool.
Yeah.
Looks like Maria and,
I'm getting there.
yeah. she can bring up our milestones.
I just have to go through it. I don't see it.
No, it's one of the
Put
ones
it together.
Steve went out Friday night.
Oh, you have an extra copy?
Not of the long one, I just have the short one, that's
Okay.
okay. So you can share it with Heather.
Right in there.
It's also just encouraging
Yes.
to see the tasks laid out in a way that seems rational. And you can think to yourself, we can get this done.
This is, it's doable, this
Yeah.
is doable in
Yeah.
chunks. And I know that we've been, anxious to get the RFP out, but I think that that overall process still puts us hiring, or starting the design, the feasibility study in May. So it is a long process that we're engaged in,
Right.
to get that underway.
So we have it up digitally over here. And I don't know if it's easier for me to try to read it to you or hand you the computer since you.
I have the
Oh, you
short
got
one,
the short one?
I have the
Okay.
short one, thank you.
Probably you want to go over.
Sure. So I started with the RFP process as the first few line items, and I broke those out in tasks fairly specifically so that we could see it sort of step by step and, hopefully recognize when the vote will be coming for that. Next, I included indoor air quality because that was already part of our major discussion. I think asbestos testing and surveying are probably the next two things that we need to put out to bid and get underway. Or any other additional testing like flow testing that we might think is necessary. And then it really starts with the feasibility study. And as far as the feasibility study, I don't think that we're hiring a geotech consultant until we have some well-defined options from the design team so that we know where we're doing
I
those
agree.
borings. And then also with the cost estimator, I don't think that we're hiring them, for another few months, really half a year at least, until we have something to start estimating. So, and that really is what that lays out as. The feasibility study itself is 162 days is what I've got defined right now. And I think in the detail of this, what we should start looking at is how we're involving the public, because I think that that's sort of a primary goal of the committee is to make sure that we have very robust public engagement and opportunity for feedback. So I've got basically 4 stages for the feasibility study: a preliminary, sort of defining or developing, I should say, and then a refining, and then a finalization. So those 4 stages are each just over a month in work days, so more like 2 months each, and that should be able to slot us some public engagement time in each of those, and then also be able to respond to the feedback that we get.
I do have the HERA asbestos testing results for this building, so we can include that.
Oh, wonderful.
That'd be great. It'd be nice to see that.
It's on the website.
It's on the website already?
For
Okay.
facilities at the regional system. It is public record for all buildings now,
That's great.
as of Friday.
Oh, sorry. Put my head down when I'm ready.
Sorry. Now, my concern about the engagement is that it falls usually during the summer, so all the feasibility, all the months takes over the summer. So we're gonna have to think carefully how to involve
That is
everybody involved, the town during the summer, because many people are away. So we should make sure that we have something before the school finishes and as soon as the school is back. But hopefully something in the middle of the summer, knowing that there's going to be lower amount of people.
I think that's a really good point, the way that
Yeah.
this is laid out right now. The first half of the feasibility study, starts in May and continues through the summer, and then the second half is really the fall semester. So maybe even extending this so that,
Yeah, letting it kind of draw out a little bit longer.
right, so that we don't reach any sort of major decision points
Yep.
in the summertime.
Yeah. Either try to push it forward a little bit and then.
I just wanted to ask, we talked about before, the geotech wasn't going to get done because that's going to be part of the team that the designer would bring, but No.
Right, I think that when the design team comes up with options and lays out the footprint of the proposed addition or of the new school, then we would hire the geotech to do the borings, you know, at the corners of the foundations, within the field of the foundation, so that we know what subsurface qualities and conditions we're anticipating. That would inform the structural engineer's work for the foundations.
I guess I'm confused about why we,
Why we wait.
why we wouldn't do it before and then, you know, so that you could tell the designer, like, this is
Because we don't
not
know
gonna
where they're
work.
planning the building.
And it would be a lot more expensive because you'd almost, to kind of think about it, you'd almost have to lay out a grid and do borings at, say, every 50 feet, you know, kind of grid, versus doing just maybe 2 or 3 or 4 spots for the options that they come up with. So instead of $10,000, my worry would be that you'd be looking at a boring fee that might be in the 50 or up, just because you'd be doing a lot of them to cover the whole territory.
Yeah, but from that point of view, on the cost, we are paying $180,000, and if the other options that they come back are in places that they cannot be built, then we lost $180,000, not.
It would be highly unlikely for them to come back with results that were impossible. It just means that the structural engineer has to take that data and adapt his design a little bit. So maybe the footings are 3 feet wide versus 2 feet wide. I'm slightly oversimplifying it,
Or
but
the depth,
Or the depth,
how much
right.
rebar is in the concrete.
When you were describing it then, my assumption was, it wasn't as if, I assumed, it wasn't as if the feasibility analysis and the scenarios would be developed in toto, and then you do the geotechnical to see which makes sense. They would overlap, but they would overlap, you'd get the feasibility folks going essentially, and then procure the geotechnical and then have them working side by side, right?
Yes.
So that, and then the other sort of, my thought when I was listening to this was that if this site is 11 acres, essentially the assumption I assume we're making, is that the options that are going to be come up with aren't going to be all over the map in terms of the entire 11 acres. There's probably some subset of the space that is around this footprint of this building, and then probably adjacent areas that are logically going to be the places where anything's going to be built or additions are going to be placed, which means there's probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 acres back that way.
By the river.
That by definition, we wouldn't under any circumstance want to be looking at anyway.
We wouldn't be able to build them, period.
Well, I'm
because
sure
of
we could, I'm sure.
Wetland setbacks.
You ever walked on those things during spring?
like walking
We used
a
to- we
sponge. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways,
Well, I would just observe that the building is standing with no major structural issues,
Correct.
so we will be able to expand it.
So, the firm maps should be, the floodplain maps were, they did additional data, that they're being updated everywhere. Those should be ready, I was told back in the end of 2017 that that's getting ready to launch. I'm not sure if you have any more data on that. But my understanding is that that's going to be coming out. And then if there is wetland analysis that needs to be done, is that part of any of this?
10K? No, this 10K really covers borings, and probably 10 borings is what that $10,000 represents, along with the testing that's associated with taking the borings and writing the report that comes with it. So what they would come back with would be, dewatering recommendations that would have to happen during construction, what the soils are like, their compactability that the structural engineer would use, but it wouldn't be any specific wetland studies.
And we're probably going to get the preliminaries in this round of borings rather than the absolute finals for the structural engineer when we go to design stage.
Correct.
This is a
One
a
boring
taste.
for an addition might suffice, whereas in
Exactly.
the real, true design of the project, they might want it at every corner.
Exactly.
So the reason that I was asking is that if we need to do wetland analysis and have that done, and if we want to have the presentation, have the folks that did the floodplain maps come and talk to us, that work has already been done. That might be something that we want to
Access.
access, have them, let's talk about that. And then that will better inform the
Right.
designer.
That wetland analysis should also be something that comes up during the surveying work.
Yeah.
So is the surveying work something that we're going to do, is that
I think that's something
gonna
we should do.
precede the
Surveying
Yeah,
work
the
comes
I think
designer?
it happens
first.
almost
That's the
anytime.
information that we give to the design team that says, this is our parcel, these are the known meets and bounds, this is what we think is on the site, this
Yeah.
is.
So how do we make that happen?
That's one of
That's
the
our
next things we have to
next-
do.
next-
Is put an RFP together or Q, depending on what we want to call it, for survey and wetland flag.
Separate from the design?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's the first thing one of the first things we'd hand off to the design team.
Eric?
I don't know if you know about this, or you were part of these conversations. I think there's can you explain the software that we're using to redo the floodplain maps?
I can't explain it, but the Joint Capital Planning Committee has authorized some new spending to finalize the town's floodplains, which I understand work had started on, but there were changes made.
Well, yeah, except the way that it was phrased to the, I mean, and we're authorizing it, but it came from the planning department, that apparently the method that was used to do all the floodplain map work, there's some new software that essentially is now used to establish and survey floodplains. Maybe you guys know about this. That's now used nationally, and that wasn't used during the process. And so look forward. I shouldn't say this. Sounds like I'm sounding sarcastic. I'm going to find an upbeat way to say this. You're going to look forward to a requested town meeting for additional funding in our capital plan to allow the planning department to essentially redo part of the work to conform with this new software documentation process that apparently, when it's done, will actually make our maps the newest, best, state-of-the-art certifiable floodplain maps. And I'm bringing that up only because a lot of people in town have been anticipating that the floodplain maps would be like filed wherever they're filed and certified, like in short order, because they should be done by now. And the reality is, they're apparently not going to be done, and after July 1st, there's going to be some new procurement of services that are going to then allow, or licensing of software, whatever it is, that's going to allow the planning department to finish it, which will take months. Could take till next year, in other words.
Okay.
Subject for another day, but I'm just saying, it's apparently, they have some information, but they're actually not going to be finalized as rapidly as I think any of us expected or hoped.
I would anticipate that might have minimal impact on our building site, as it's flat, it's already well known as a wetland, and I'm sure that the tolerances between those two surveying criteria as they're represented in the software is going to be minimal. Hopefully.
I would guess so too.
Yeah. And the rules that keep you back from those areas are pretty broad. I think it's 200 feet, and so.
So, the maps that they came up with last year that FEMA had done, was a substantially different floodplain.
Was it?
Map, substantially different than the previous, which was done in the 80s.
Okay.
So, and which pushed the boundary of the 100-year and 500-year floodplain very far back to the river. When I spoke with folks about this, and I was saying, when is this going to be out? I mean, the work has been done. This is the newest technology, blah, blah, blah. There seemed to be some question, but not directly related to this site. So the maps, if you go on, you can, last I checked, you can check them on the town website. The floodplain maps were very different than that which they were working with during the previous project.
Excuse me, I need to take off.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it does sound like that's not fully resolved.
Well, I'm sure the planning department
Yeah.
can talk to us. I was just saying the challenge, I really meant there's the challenge of talking about what their sort of current deliverables are, what information they have to share, which may not change very much. I mean, regardless of how it changed from the 80s, I was saying what you were saying, it may not change much from their final version to what they know now. But I just mean in terms of literally saying, oh great, now it's all filed and it's done and it's all set and we don't have to, we just look at the final thing. apparently that may be delayed months, but that shouldn't stop us from talking to the planning department and having them engage with us however we want.
Great.
So I had spoken with Mr. Zomack back, anticipating that our group was getting rolling, and he did indicate that he would be more than happy to come and talk to us. And I mean, if that's something that we can start pursuing as we're waiting for other things, and I'm happy to approach him again.
I don't see that as a bad thing. It would be good to start engaging folks on the topics we can engage them on, while we're getting the other RFQs out.
It's like looking at that asbestos report, right?
Yeah.
Floods and asbestos.
So a little bit of mold.
So we make a motion so that Maria contacts, or it's okay?
I think it's all right for her just to reach out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes. I think slightly
I
distracted.
think we've exhausted our agenda.
I think we have. Anthony?
So, anything that we do, my understanding is that the school committee needs to nominate me to take over Claire's position. I don't know if this committee needs to do anything to let that school
So,
committee go.
we don't have this item on the agenda, and therefore, I'm not going to talk about it. It just needs to be put on a future agenda, and then we can talk about it.
So I don't know what this committee needs to do to make that.
We need to put it on a future agenda, and then I'm going to come in, and we'll talk about it exactly, and we'll be able to move forward.
Okay.
It's literally just an open meeting thing.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is that it's already on the draft agenda for next
Yeah,
time, so.
just rock it.
Yep.
Really something that's part of what we've already been talking about. I have a couple more minutes. I don't know if anybody else needs to fly out, but since we are here, it would help me if on the next agenda we do have this community outreach outline, and hopefully we'll get through and get it finalized, approved, and posted on our website and all of that. But there's you alluded to, we had opened the discussion a little bit about what would be good milestones to engage the public on. And it'd be nice if I came into the meeting next week with something to share, talk about a little more. So if we took 5 minutes now to talk about where you were possibly seeing
Sure.
things.
Yep, so on the 3-pager instead of the 1-pager, there's subtasks on each of these, and so I think it would be somewhere in between. If I put 2 weeks in for the presentation of options for each design phase, each of the 4 stages that I've got identified so far, and I think 1 week would probably be the engagement of, or over those 2 weeks would be engaging the public, but also the formal presentation to the committee, as well as outreach. And I think those 2 weeks should give us enough time to,
So this is at the end of,
it's in the middle. So if you looked at like preliminary option development, I gave 5 weeks to the design team to come up with those options, and then 2 weeks of presentation, which would be closed out by 1 day of voting, or discussion and voting by this committee, to be able to give them feedback and direction. So ideally, it would be, presenting to the public in the first week and gaining feedback, maybe some additional the second week, but then having the final meeting for discussing the presentation and the options presented along with the feedback, and giving direction to the design team on what to do next.
so this is ID number 30 on your,
Right, so it
Or
would be
29 actually.
29. Yep, presentation of options. And then I did the same thing for each week, so there's another 33 presentation of options. Once they have, defined the options a little more. And then similarly, 37 with the cost estimates, same thing, 2 weeks of presentations.
and 44.
And yes,
Do we feel like it's important?
42 rather.
42.
42.
Engage the public on the selection process of the designers?
I think that
Other than just press release saying our meetings are open to the public as always and.
Sure. What we've been talking about in the smaller group is interviewing the finalists, and I would assume that those would have to be open interviews. So
We would have the option of going into executive session. That's an option.
My recollection is in a recent meeting, the superintendent, not that he controls this group in any way, but based on his past experience, he strongly urged us to have them in open session and not have recourse to executive session. And that sounded like really good advice to me.
I would agree.
And then didn't he go further though to say that having an executive session to discuss the, you know, to make, for the decision-making
Oh,
process?
yeah, no, he was like,
okay.
basically do all of it open, which I'd agree with.
But he did talk about the discussion about the qualifications as being in a closed session. I think so he felt, I remember that from 2 meetings ago, but maybe I'm misremembering it. I thought he was saying that he wanted people to be able to speak, you know, frankly about the candidates and in a way that they feel hesitant to do if it was an open session. So that a decision was made that was, you know, solid with everyone's input rather than people holding back because it's a public session. That's what I remember from 2 meetings ago.
You may be right.
We should go back and look at the minutes.
Yeah, I think we could return to the conversation too, and get
Yeah.
more people.
when we get to that.
to that meeting.
Yeah, and again, that's just
You
his
know, I mean,
his
to me,
take.
yeah, I
I
mean,
think
to me, it
we can
depended on what,
decide.
it's interesting, I mean, it depended on what, I think if we got a lot of responses and we were down selecting the responses, I mean, this is like when you go through interview processes and you're screening and you have like 20 applicants and you know you're only gonna have 3 finalists and you screen out 10 people initially and you don't do that publicly and you just go through some process and you score it. To me, that makes sense. I think when you get down to the, we should talk, but this needs to be an agenda item.
Yeah.
We're actually wavering onto open meeting law violation by talking about stuff that's not on our
Yeah.
agenda. I'm sorry.
What I'd like to do though is just
Yep.
circle back to Heather's question and state that this schedule is really just a draft and those
Yep.
2 weeks are placeholders, and I think we should have the discussion about how to engage the public, and it might be different for each of these sort of steps and milestones in the process. But I think it would be more than just meetings, because I think, as you noted in your proposal, that not everyone can come to a meeting and that there's more than one way to get feedback.
Great.
Do you want to go briefly on the other RFQ or not?
I think we can wait till another time, because I think we were still incorporating changes in the feedback that we got the last time around. Unless there's something very specific that someone wants to.
I had 2 comments.
Okay.
But I can skip if you want. I have 2 quick comments. On part 1, on the bottom of part 1 says, design work should include renovation, addition, demolition. Shouldn't say design work should explore.
Where are we?
At the bottom of page 1.
It currently says what?
Should include versus
Should include.
Explore, yeah.
Versus should explore.
Yes, because we want them to actually do it, not just, no.
And then on page 2, the feasibility study shall present at least 3 viable options for the project. We are okay with having 3 only, or we would like to have 3 is a realistic number, or viable options for the project.
That number came over when I was incorporating the New York deliverables that Heather suggested, but I'm sure we can make whatever.
I think when it says at least 3, we have the option, but we don't like those 3 to request more.
That's the question, whether we should put the, if you're comfortable with 3 or.
I think it's not, I think as Jonathan pointed out, it's a minimum number. We have to have at least 3.
Don't
Yeah.
fight me. Don't fight me. Ah.
Just gonna ask, come on, we got those. Were they helpful?
I asked
They were
if
helpful?
I could have it.
Yeah, the feasibility study shell on is a merging of what was there in the New York specs.
So those were my comments. I managed to do that today.
I will say, I do believe I've incorporated everything that was suggested up until this point. Every word and every formatting request, so I might have missed one, but I think this does reflect all changes up until now.
And I'll just mention that I did a little bit of wordsmithing on the section that was incorporated from the previous SOI.
Yeah, and it includes those changes as
Okay,
well.
great. So,
Okay,
And
think we're done?
can we get these drafts on the website? Are they there?
They're not yet there. I'm having computer problems, so my computer is there.
So hopefully at the next meeting we'll get you some help.
Hopefully,
no.
and if not,
Or you're in.
he's in, so he can
Yeah.
do it. Otherwise,
Yeah, so generally speaking, I'm not gonna post something unless someone tells me to as backup, but
Okay.
if we want this draft posted
I would-
publicly.
yes.
Sure, yeah.
I would love to be able to go to the website and find whatever we're talking about there, rather than searching through my email to find it. Because that means the public also has it, which is a great thing.
So we're done, we need a motion.
We move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Third
Thank you.
time.